Don't know if you remember a couple of weeks ago. It's a long time, it's a couple of weeks, isn't it? Especially near Christmas. I was talking on James 1. Don't know if you remember that. And I haven't left it yet, so some of this is a little bit more on that. Because I don't know whether it won't leave me alone or I won't leave it alone. James, I believe, was a brother of Jesus. And as I said last time, these letters were not written with little numbers next to the verses. I think there is a tendency, and it's not a bad tendency, but it's not the only thing you can do, is to take verses and then not look at the whole thing as an event, which is what it was meant to be. It was meant to be read out in public, giving people help and advice, bespoke to their circumstances. James must have heard that they were having what is here called trials, difficulties, things that really tested them. And he wanted to encourage them and help them and give them advice. He also must have heard, because in that world at the time, 2,000 years ago, they didn't have email and they didn't have text or anything like that, but word did get round. You know, word of mouth. He must have heard that maybe it was causing some problems for them within the church, not just from outside into the church. And he writes to give them advice. And I think it's a very relevant letter as a whole. It's only 5 chapters, and it's worth a read. But it's like all things. If you read it in one translation and you think, well, I really don't get this at all, it's always better to go to a different one, to compare them, and to look at a modern one. And sometimes you can get ones that have no verses in, and it helps the flow a bit. So I did say that at the beginning last time. I have a kind of times when I'm really keen on one translation, I just follow that one and move out from that one, and sometimes I'm hopping between them. Because every translator has a different, slightly different flavour, and sometimes you get a better insight, because language is very personal. But God can use, we're so fortunate to have all these translations. God can use those words to go right into your heart and pick up something and throw it onto the screen so you see it large when you read this. So I would say don't worry too much if you don't understand it all. Just give God an opportunity to speak to you in your heart. Then when you become sensitive to it, you also find that there are circumstances in life, things that you might see on the television, things that other people might say, that enter your heart and throw things large on a kind of screen and go, I get that now. I understand that. Because even though we are on a journey to discover our real selves in practice in God, we need all the help that we can get. We are God-like, but that's only the start of the understanding. The way that James comes at it, he wants to give people some really, really practical advice. And he doesn't pull his punches, as they say. He doesn't skirt around the problems. But I will read out what he starts off with. And the rest of it is a natural progression to the rest of it. And at the end, he gives them some practical advice, but also in the middle. Anyway, so the first bit starts this. Consider it pure joy, my brothers, whenever you face trials of many kinds. Doesn't sound right happy time, does it? Because you know that the testing of your faith develops perseverance. I really do. I'd like to have something else, but I wouldn't like to do that thing, you know. But it does happen. We all get them, don't we? Perseverance, I can't even say it. Perseverance must finish its work so you may be mature and complete. Sticking at it is hard, but you get there in the end. Not lacking anything. If any of you lacks wisdom, he should ask God, who generously gives to all without finding fault. But when he asks, he must believe, not doubt. And so he goes on saying, don't be tossed around. So I'm now going to read it in the Mirror because I feel, to me, it brought it out more. Temptations come in different shapes and sizes and intervals. Their intention is always to suck you into their energy field. There are some powerful energy fields out there. However, my brothers, I dare say he meant sisters as well, your joy in who you are leads you out triumphantly every time. Here is the secret. Joy is not something you have to fake. It is the fruit of what your faith knows to be true about you. You know that the proof of your faith results in the persuasion, means that you're convinced, that remains the same in contradiction. So when everything that is saying the opposite is thrown at you, you go, no, I believe what I believe, end of. You're not persuaded by the trials that you're in. You still believe in who you really are. Steadfastness provides you with a consistent environment. So you can imagine, you are in an environment which is not so good for you, but you create your own environment by believing the things that are good about you, not what's coming at you. So you create your own microclimate, mini environment by surrounding yourself with better than what's being thrown at you. And that comes from within, inside you, from the God in you, from the Holy Spirit who is with you. He's made his home with you because you've embraced the kingdom and you continue to embrace the words of Jesus. So you create your own microclimate, your own microenvironment. The only thing you could possibly lack is wisdom. However, make your request in such a way that draws directly from the source. You can imagine some requests don't draw from if you're not in a good mood, you could say, I'd like you to smite them, they're right getting on my nerves. That is not surrounding you with the kingdom of heaven. They'll get what they deserve. And later on he does say there is two kinds of wisdom. One wisdom comes from selfish ambition. This is in 3:13. Who is wise and understanding? Let him show it by his good life, by his deeds, in humility. If you start talking not in humility, what's coming out of your mouth, you know that that's not the wisdom. The wisdom that comes from heaven is that first of all pure, then peace-loving, considerate, submissive, i.e. gentle, full of mercy and good fruit, impartial and sincere, peacemakers who sow in peace raise a harvest of righteousness. So he wants to empower us to create that environment around us when everything else around us is the exact opposite to that. People try and press your buttons, circumstances try and press your buttons. They are trying to draw you into being angry, upset, out of peace, and you don't look at them, you don't receive them, you create your own microclimate, that is the kingdom of heaven. And I rather like the way it says, that we are kind of, drawn to him. And it says a little bit later on that you should draw near to God and he will draw near to you towards the end. So we are not drawn into the climate, the prevailing climate of the whirlwind and the wind and everything that's going on, people's bad attitudes, people's problems. But sometimes we need to decide how exactly to react and how to deal with things. And he says, just turn to me and what you'll get is a way of maintaining that peace and also blessing other people. You're not shutting yourself off. You're trying to create another atmosphere that will bless others and not just cut yourself off from them. I didn't have a great deal of inspiration. I was finding it difficult to think, well, what shall I speak about? I can't get away from James and what I said last time. I could just go on the same way, but something really struck me in a television program that I saw. Some people may have seen this program and may not. For those people who haven't seen the program, it's a program where celebrities, so-called, or people, enter a jungle situation where they have a lot of trials and tribulations. They submit themselves to the trials and tribulations on purpose, and they live in a group. And they don't know each other. And really they're without food, without their friends and family. It's a really intense experience to them. And they start to live like this. It's not for a long time, but it must feel like a long time when you're in there. Has anybody seen that program? Do you know what I'm talking about? Has anybody not seen that program? You may not have seen it. You know, when I say God speaks to you, not just through here, but through other things, you know. But I was really struck by a particular circumstances during these trials and tribulations these people were putting themselves through. I won't tell you what they asked them to eat. It's quite disgusting. And, you know, and sometimes they starve them, and sometimes they get them to interact with horrible little beasts and nasty animals, and they're sleeping on the floor, and it's really unpleasant. So in some ways, they're creating a trials and tribulations environment for themselves on purpose. And what people are watching for and voting for is who they like best, and I think who they think is dealing with this and coming out on top with it. So I just thought it was really interesting. But there was one guy, and I've written down a little bit of what happened to him. I don't know if anybody's heard of him. He's called Ian Wright, and he's a black footballer. Really nice man, big guy, ex-footballer, you know, and you know, different people have had different reactions. Mostly they've tried to keep their act together, because mostly they want to be the best people they are, like we do in life, don't we? So it's been interesting to watch him, but he was starting lack of food, lack of properly comfort or sleeps, lack of it. He started to get a little bit of a reputation for being a bit of a tetchy individual who took offence really quickly. And he started to let himself get kind of overwhelmed by the situation. But I think anybody would. And of course, there are people who are tweeting and writing online about this. Oh, look at him, look what he's doing, you know, in a right self-righteous sort of a way. But when I was reading James, he talks about how your tongue can get carried away with you. Later on in James, he's saying, you know, it's a small thing, but it can drive your behaviour. It's like a small rudder on a ship. The rudder takes it to which way it will go, and so on and so forth. And so his mouth was taking him places where he was becoming offended and aggressive. And he was being criticised in the media for it. He wouldn't know that. But what I was so touched by was what happened when he suddenly had what they call an epiphany. It's a light bulb moment about himself. It was lovely, you know, and still people still criticising him and thinking, no, you know. And he suddenly realised that this experience had created an environment where he had a revelation about himself. And I really think that is why James is saying, embrace this, because you will find out who you really are in this, and you can challenge perhaps some of your reactions and decide not to do them anymore. In this book, he talks about anger and how it can overtake you. It can, if somebody insults you or insults the people you love or the something that you love, you can find a person inside of you that you didn't even know was there. My mum was once in the kitchen when I was a baby, and her dad and her stepmum were in the main room looking at me and talking about me. And she didn't like what she heard they were saying. And my dad said, "You came out of that kitchen like a tiger. Ah! To defend her young. Do not speak about my baby like that." All of a sudden, her buttons have been pressed. Now, when you're in trials and tribulations, the chances of your buttons being pressed are fairly high. Somebody will find that weak point, or the circumstance will find that weak point. Some people go, "Well, it was them. They started it. It was them. They made me do it. They made me call them those names. They made me be angry with them because they did this and they did that." So what happened with Ian Wright? He said he was talking to a friend of his, a big rugby player called James Haskell, who's been quite an encouragement to everybody up till recently when he's got a bit tetchy himself. He noted that he tended to let himself get overwhelmed by minor grudges. But to him, they wouldn't seem minor. And he would try and become more mild in future. But what he said, "It's been an interesting what this experience has done to me." This experience was bringing out the worst in him. He said, "It sped up the process." And I think this is what James is saying. Your better self will lead you out in triumph. He said, "It sped up the process of me realizing I get too wrapped up in," and there was a pause, and I thought, what's he going to say? He said, and he was trying to think of describing it in the pause. He went, "I get too wrapped up in feeling wronged." I thought, how many people can say that? People do get wrapped up in feeling wronged, and it makes them angry. They feel self-justification. They feel they have to stick up for themselves. And his friend said, "Yes, something comes over you like a wave." He said, "I know it takes me so long to get out of it. This has helped me in that respect. It's time to leave that Ian behind." It's time to leave that Ian behind. What a revelation. He saw something in himself that he knew he didn't want to be. But it's almost like he couldn't help himself. But all of a sudden, the process of the trials and tribulations that had been in sped up the process and made him think, "Hello, is that me talking? Is that me being, tetchy and picking on this Irish guy?" The Irish guy were giving it back at one point or other, but then he started to step back himself. He thought, "No, I don't want to get into it." He said, "Everybody said when I went into the jungle, just be yourself and it'll work out all right." He said, "But I found out about being myself. There's still some things I need to shed." I just thought that was brilliant. What a man. What a man. When he said, "I get too wrapped up in," it reminded me of the veil that Moz was talking about. When the veil is down over your eyes, you don't see God and you don't see you, who you really are. And if you're wrapped up, you imagine being wrapped up in cellophane, you don't actually see what's going on. And when you get wrapped up in the problems of life, you are unable to see how to deal with them and what your part in dealing with them is. And I was really impressed by the fact that he said, "This has sped up the process." Something that was horrible, not eating, having a bad time, missing your family. But he said, "This has sped up the process." And also, he'd really appreciated somebody who would encourage him. which is at the end of James. That's what it says. You know, if you're having problems, let yourself be encouraged by other people. Some people cut themselves off, so they can't be encouraged. There's nobody there. Or they might sit at home and they might have a pity party. Because, you see, it's everybody else. It's not me, is it? You know, I'm all right, Jack. And I dare say in the past, he has said the same thing. If they didn't do this, I wouldn't be like that. But all of a sudden he thought, it's time to leave that Ian behind. And I think we say, yes, we are like God, and we believe that. But there are things in us that are not God-like. And they come out when we're in the most difficult of circumstances. And he goes through what some kind of the circumstances are. He talks about wealth. If you are very rich or very poor, wealth can bring out the worst in you. Lack of wealth can bring. But as the commentary in the Mirror says, wealth or not wealth does not define who you really are. And so it's really important. It doesn't matter, or the ability to get wealth. And he goes into quite a lot about that at the beginning of chapter 5. He goes, now listen, you rich people. Sort yourself out, in so many words. And start. He said, the cries of the Lord for the people you're oppressing are reaching your ears, are reaching his ears. And you think, is he talking to a church here? He's actually saying that some people who are receiving this letter are actually not behaving very well to people who are poor. He also says earlier on that when rich people come in, they get the best seats. And when the poor come in, they have to sit on the floor. So wealth or not wealth brings with it a whole load of stuff that can be part of your identity that you need to leave behind. Like Ian said, you may get wrapped up in that whether you've got this or whether you haven't got that, but that's not part of your identity. This is what he says. Has not God chosen those who are poor in the eyes of the world to be rich in faith and to inherit the kingdom as he promised to those who loved him? He said, look at people through those eyes, not as to whether they are poor, rich, black, white, foreign, not foreign, big, small, intelligent, not intelligent. Look at people in a different way. So what he's saying is there are things, just like Ian said, there are some things in this congregation that he's talking about. Leave things behind. Then he said, he talks about helping the poor. He says real religion is to have a real focus on helping those people that you meet that have not got. If you have, you give. Don't be, oh, well, I don't know. They might spend it on drugs. You're not there to judge people, but to love them. And so he goes through an awful lot of things. Anger is one of the things he talks about. Taming the tongue. And obviously this is something that they had. They became wrapped up in possibly self-righteousness. And that makes you very angry if you feel that you are having the finger pointed at you, or you're in the right and they're in the wrong. That's what Ian was involved in. He'd become wrapped up in being wronged. Some people don't get angry, they just sulk or have a pity party, and other people want to punch somebody or get their own back or have revenge. But all these things happen, the hitting out and the going down into a sort of melancholic slump, they all happen during things that are real trials and temptations. They all create an environment that can suck you in. This is life and death for us. When people start calling you names at school, when people start saying, I'm not your friend, when other people start talking behind your back, you want to go and tell them what's what. And you want to say, you can't, you want to give them what's what. Now, I don't say don't go and talk to people, but you have to reach peace within yourself before you go and deal with any of that stuff. If I knew that there was an issue when I was working, or even now, I can't speak to anybody unless I know I've reached that place of peace where I can hear what God's saying to me. Should I go or should I stay? Because I have left the scared Eileen behind. I want to walk in on a daily basis. They're not scared Eileen. They're not, because women can be very subtle about it. They can be very, what they call passive aggressive, They look as if they're saying something nice, but really they're not saying something nice. They can be very sneaky. Can they? Yeah, yeah. And I mean, to be honest, that's worse, isn't it? So anger is not all about, standing with your hands on your hips and giving it what for. In actual fact, I used to think at school, when I was working as a head, I used to think, I'd rather have that. Please have a row with me. Don't go off and go, please come and speak to me. Let's resolve, because you get resolve then, don't you? You can get resolve once everything's calmed down. But we sometimes get wrapped up in self-justification. We get wrapped up in, oh, poor me. We get wrapped up in our selfishness. And our justification is what's been done to me and what's being done to me in the environment. But what he's saying is, you are better than that. In yourself is the whole of heaven. You sit in the heavenly places. You have everything that you need for life and godliness. I don't know if anybody can tell me what quote that's from. Sorry? 2 Peter 1, did you say? Thank you. 2 Peter 1, you've been given everything for life and godliness. And you are loved so much. In the jungle, the celebrities realise that their greatest strength is their companionship among them. And they sit round the fire and they share even their downs and ups. And they find the companionship of others. The fact that they are loved makes them strong. And they are loved by their people at home. And the whole programme brings out the fact that love is everything to people. They want to hear from their loved ones. And they want to establish relationships with people there that are mutually supportive. It doesn't matter if you haven't got a lot of food. It doesn't matter if you are being crawled on by green ants and bin. It doesn't matter if you're having all these trials and tribulations. They keep their focus on their loved ones and on love. And during the time when we know that we're having the worst time ever, it's draw near to God and he will draw near to you. Not that he isn't near to you anywhere. He's in you and with you all the time. But if you wrap your eyesight round, if you wrap your head, if you wrap yourself round in anger, upsetness, fear, all the things, if you wrap yourself up in being wronged, everybody loves to be wronged, don't they? Because it makes you feel so good. I am wronged. I have a cause. Yeah, I remember once receiving the most rude letter you could ever imagine. A threatening and rude letter from somebody in a union, not my union. And it was January the 1st, I'd just come back. My gorge rose. I was so angry, I could spit. I thought, right, if you want to fight. You wouldn't think so, but I pressed my buttons well and truly. And then after the adrenaline had gone down, I can't deal with this with revenge in mind. I thought, well, if you want to fight, Yeah, I'm good at that. I'm not entirely unintelligent in being able to defend myself. But before I acted in any way, I had to collect myself and get wisdom in it. Peace and humility. I had to think about why that person wrote that letter, what they were trying to achieve. And I thought, yes, I am not going to act like they act. I am not them. And I am not going to get my own back. I'm going to get wisdom on this. And the only way you can get wisdom is to have peace. Draw near to God. And realize that when you look in that mirror, he talks about, is saying in 22 of verse 1, don't merely listen to the word. Don't deceive yourselves. Do what it says. Anyone who listens to the word but doesn't do it is like a man who looks at his face in a mirror. And after he looks at himself and goes away, he forgets who he is. So on that day when I was wrapped in fury, if you like, I wasn't singing, any of the songs that we sang here today. I was just very cross indeed. And I completely, for that point in time, forgot who I really was. Because what I really was a boxer stepping into a ring. I got my gloves on, I'm going, right, here we go. And I dealt with it, calmly. I still dealt with it, doesn't mean I didn't, but I used calmness and wisdom, and I contacted the right kind of people to support me because I was able to ask God for wisdom. When you are calm, your mind wraps with his. The word in James that is used is like plaiting, hapless. When you want wisdom, your mind, when it's in peace and humility, wraps with his. You just have to calm down and think for a bit. And think, right, okay, where are we going with this? This is a trial and tribulation. The first thing I need to do is not put boxing gloves on, put them down, get out of the ring. How can I deal with this without getting in the ring with the boxing gloves on and behaving like they're behaving? What else can I do? How am I going to deal with this? And you gain heavenly wisdom that comes from above. That's what James calls it later on. He calls it heavenly wisdom that comes from above. He says, such wisdom, the fighting wisdom, if you harbour bitter envy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not boast about it or deny the truth. Such wisdom does not come from heaven, but is earthly, unspiritual. Because that anger, where you want to do to them what they did to you, is not good. But he says the wisdom that comes from heaven is first of all pure. That means you can see God. Blessed are the pure in heart, they can see God. You can have a face-to-face. You can have a talk. You have the power to have a face-to-face, not a fight. You have the power to go to God and go, I need your help, and I'll take your advice because you know better than me what to do because I'm stuck with this one. I've just been attacked. A lot of people, when they are attacked, they want to go and tell absolutely everybody rather than deal with the situation. They'll go to their mates, their mothers, the cat, the dog, Facebook. Look what they did to me. Look what she said to me. Look what they have. Look what they've done. Look what they've done. Surely you all agree that the number of times people used to come to me and go, this is true. Everybody thinks so. No, everybody you've spoke to realises you're angry and they're not going to argue with you. That's all. But the wisdom that comes from heaven is first of all pure. It's as a result of the interface that you've had with yourself and God. Peace-loving, considerate, full of mercy and good fruit, patient. It's a higher thing entirely, and we are able to do that. because we can interface with God. We can interface with him. And that's what submission really means. It doesn't mean groveling. It means not to want to fight everything and everybody. It's to do with going, right, this is what I'm experiencing. What do you think? Let me hear from wisdom. Let me hear from wisdom. Let me take the best advice possible. Don't do anything. I always think, if you don't know what to do, do nothing until you actually know what to do. Because a lot of things do need dealing with. So that's what James is saying. Consider it, consider that I'm a celebrity, you're in the jungle. It'll bring out the best in you if you let it. Because you can interface with who you really are. It'll speed up the process. And your joy in who you are leads you out triumphantly every time. Because you go through the process. You go, here comes a trial. This is making me very angry and miserable. Am I going to fight back? Am I going to do this on my own? Or am I going to get all my mates to join in and go around their house and witter at them or slander their character? He talks about slander. James knows that people slander each other when they get angry. And he talks about this. He says, don't be doing this. Do not be slandering people. Tame the tongue. Go to the quiet place. Decide how you're going to deal with things. Because you have got to create your own micro atmosphere. Not get sucked into the energy of everybody else. At the end, he gives, a different perspective in what you can do when you're suffering from unbelievable pressures. He says, is anyone in trouble? They should pray. Talk to God. If you're in trouble, it's not rocket science, as they say. Is anybody happy? Well, sure you're happy. Don't hold it in. Is any one of you sick? Ask for prayer. Ask the elders for prayer. And talk to one another. He says, confess your sins to each other and pray for each other so that you may be healed. If you've got a problem, be a speaker and a listener. Communicate to each other. Communicate to the people who love you. And pray for each other and don't judge each other. And he says, well, get involved in positive activities as opposed to angry, reactive, being sucked into the environment activities. Obviously, Ian Wright knew. He reflected on his past behaviour. And he realised that was not the person he really was. He knew that he was better than that. And he said, I just get wrapped up and it takes me ages to get unwrapped. Sometimes it takes ages to unwrap Christmas presents, doesn't it? You say, who's wrapped this up? Tear it off. Next layer, next layer, next layer. Who's put all this sellotape on? Well, sometimes you're that sellotaped into this, you think it's part of you. Sometimes you're that sellotaped up into your... It's become part of you. It's only a covering that's been created over the time. You're that well sellotaped in, you think that's really you. Well, yeah, I just can't help it. It's just me. I'm just like that. Well, don't be like that. Because Ian took off the covering and he went, I want to leave that Ian behind. A bit like a snake sloughs off the skin, don't they? They slough off the skin. He stepped out of that Ian because he thought, that Ian is not really the Ian I really identify myself with. I thought, go Ian. I thought, I need to learn from Ian. Because he will have, being a black footballer, he would have had racial abuse. He might have a very good reason to have a chip on his shoulder about a lot of things, despite his success. But he still didn't think that that identity was his own. He thought, no, I'm leaving that one behind. And the trials sped up the process, and that made him happy. So when it says, count it all joy, and you think, joy? Joy? Trials and tribulations? I don't think. That makes me miserable. What he thought was, no, I learned something about myself. It sped it up, and now I can go on to be a better me. And this is what he's saying. You will learn how to be a better you when you reflect on and you go to God for wisdom and you embrace the kingdom values and the kingdom relationship, because you keep looking in that mirror. That's who you really are. Don't walk away and forget who you are and end up being the boxer, getting in the ring. No, you're not the boxer, you're God. You don't have to get in the ring and fight with the others. You don't have to go in the corner and have the pity party. You don't have to, cry to everybody and go, oh, look what they've done. Oh, they've done this to me. Or look what they've done to me. Don't you agree they're terrible? You don't have to do that. And this is what James is talking about. There are many things to deal with in your life, but be together in it. We're all on the same journey. Pray for each other. Encourage each other. Don't judge each other. And then, trials and tribulations, when you persist in them, in the end, you're all the better for it. It doesn't bring you down. It brings you up. Amen. End of.